It is Thoroughly Jewish Thursday. Join me.
It's time for The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Michael Brown is the director of the Coalition of Conscience and president of Fire School of Ministry. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Well, we've been talking a lot about the end times as the book written by Professor Craig Keener and I comes out in just a few days, March 19th. Not afraid of the Antichrist, why we don't believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. So on today's Thoroughly Jewish Thursday broadcast, we're going to talk about some Jewish views of the end times. Judaism does not talk about it the same way that Christianity does. The focus is a little bit different, but there's still a lot of texts in Judaism that speculate, that talk about the end of the age. So we'll look at some of those today and take your Jewish-related calls, including calls about the end times. 866-34-TRUTH, 866-348-7884. And let me make plain, if I was debating a Jehovah's Witness, if I was debating a Muslim, if I was debating someone outside the faith on life and death faith issues, in other words, issues that make the difference between heaven and hell, then I would do my best always to be gracious to my opponent, but to demolish the other arguments with truth as best as possible, to help set people free to follow the truth, to help put seeds of doubt and question in those who are deceived, and to fortify and strengthen true believers. When I'm dealing with friends, brothers, and sisters in the Lord who believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, my goal is not to demolish your arguments. My goal is to say, hey, I appreciate where you're coming from. Here's why I differ. Here's another way to look at these scriptures. Consider this viewpoint. What I do take issue with is people who get really dogmatic and nasty on either side. You know, I was noticing some comments to my interview with Dr. Keener. By the way, when you order Not Afraid of the Antichrist from our website, we're shipping already. But when you order from AskDrBrown.org, we're also going to send you a link to download the interview so that you'll get the full interview that I did with Professor Keener to listen to that as well. But I noticed someone differing with us and saying, false teacher, heretic. And then someone else posting on Facebook, what, you're going to say heaven and hell aren't real? As if the pre-trib rapture was that sacred. Now, I could come from the exact opposite point of view and say this is a new teaching within the last couple hundred years, and it's deceiving many and giving them a false hope. And I would rather say, hey, look, here's why I differ scripturally. I respect the many pre-trib believers in the body today. I believe the number is lower than it was, say, 30 years ago, and higher than it was 200 years ago, because, again, it didn't exist as a teaching before then. But these are disagreements we have within the Lord. That is the whole purpose of our discussion, to have friendly, useful, edifying interaction and learning from each other. 866-348-7884. That's the number to call with Jewish-related questions or questions about the end times. And I'll be going to the phones shortly. But I want to start with a text in the Mishna. The Mishna is compiled about 200 or 220 AD. All right, so roughly 170 to 190 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. You could say in certain ways it's the first code of Jewish law, but it's really a compilation of laws and discussions. It's not meant to be a comprehensive code in terms of do this every day, do that every day. But it's the first systematic compilation. It's under 6 different headings. And in the section on women, one of the headings there is Sota, that is about an unfaithful woman, a woman who strays. What are the laws in the Pentateuch about that, etc. And in the Mishnah, there are only a couple of references to the Messiah. The Talmud, which expands on the Mishnah, has many references to the Messiah. But the Mishnah, which is really focused on various laws and practices, does not speak much about the Messiah, only a couple of instances. This is one of them. It is the last verse or Mishna, which also means verse, and the tractate Sota. So tractate is like a book. So chapter 9, verse 7. And it says this. It's talking about the decline of spirituality and what's going to happen at the end of the age. When Rabbi Meir died, the composers of fables ceased. When Ben Azai died, the diligent students of Torah ceased. When Ben Zoma died, the expounders ceased. When Rabbi Yehoshua died, goodness ceased from the world. When Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel died, locusts came and troubles multiplied. When Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah died, the sages ceased to be wealthy. When Rabbi Akiva died, the glory of the Torah ceased. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa died, men of wondrous deeds died. So these are all in the previous generations. All these people have died, not going back hundreds and hundreds of years, but just the previous generations and talking about spiritual decline. When Rabbi Yosef Katnuta died, the pious men, Hasidim, died. And why was his name called Katnuta? Because he was the youngest of the pious men. Katnuta would be small, young. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai died, the splendor of wisdom ceased. When Rabbi Gamliel the elder died, the glory of the Torah ceased, and purity and separateness perished. Rabbi Ishmael ben Fabi died, the splendor of the priesthood died. When Rabbi, meaning Rabbi Yehuda, the compiler of the Mishnah, died, humility and fear of sin ceased. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair says, when temple was destroyed, scholars and freemen were ashamed and covered their head. Men of wondrous deeds were disregarded, and violent men and big talkers grew powerful. So this is 150 years earlier when the temple was destroyed. And nobody expounds, nobody seeks, and nobody asks. Upon whom shall we depend? Upon our Father who is in heaven. So it's talking about these great leaders who died, and now it's a time of spiritual declension. Rabbi Eliezer the Great says, when the day the temple was destroyed, the sages began to be like scribes. In other words, everything's gone down spiritually. Scribes like synagogue attendants like common people, and the common people more and more debased. So there's been steady spiritual backsliding, and nobody seeks. Upon whom shall we depend? Upon our Father who is in heaven. Now, look at this, in this context of spiritual declension and backsliding. In the footsteps of the Messiah, insolence will increase, and the cost of living will go up greatly. So in the time immediately leading up to the coming of the Messiah, this is a Jewish tradition. In the footsteps of the Messiah, insolence will increase, and the cost of living will go up greatly. The vine will yield its fruit, but wine will be expensive. The government will turn to heresy, and there will be no one to rebuke. The meeting place of scholars will be used for licentiousness. The Galilee will be destroyed. The Goblin will be desolated. And the dwellers on the frontier will go about begging from place to place without anyone to take pity on them. The wisdom of the learned will rot. Those who fear sin will be despised, and the truth will be lacking. Youths will put old men to shame. The old will stand up in the presence of the young. For son spurs father, daughter rises up against mother, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. A man's old household are his enemies. Micah 7:6. Interestingly, Yeshua quotes these same words about his coming. Excuse me, don't think I came to bring peace, he says, but a sword. And he quotes the same verse. Fascinating. The face of the generation, that final generation, will be like the face of a dog. A son will not feel ashamed before his father. Upon whom shall we depend? Upon our Father who is in heaven. Rav Pinchas ben Yair says, quickness leads to cleanliness, cleanliness leads to purity, purity leads to separation, separation leads to sanctity, sanctity leads to humility, humility leads to fear of sin leads to piety, piety leads to the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit leads to the resuscitation of the dead. The resuscitation of the dead leads to the coming of Elijah. Maybe he be remembered for good. Amen. So it's a very unusual passage in the Mishnah in that it's not dealing so much with laws, legal rulings, legal debate, and it's talking about the final generation, and interestingly about the spiritual decline in that time. How much more, you would ask, has there been spiritual decline to this day? In Jewish thinking, the high point was Moses on Mount Sinai, and then every generation since then has been one step further removed from the Sinai revelation. It would be like the person sitting right next to me playing a game of telephone, a whisper in their ear, and I come up with some silly sentence like the cow will jump over the moon after the frog comes jumping home. Well, the person that hears it directly from me, if they're listening carefully, they have a pretty good chance of repeating it. But the further down you get, 5, 10, 15, 20 people, it's probably going to get pretty boggled and twisted at that point. So the Jewish concept is the closer the Jewish people were to Sinai, the more accurately the revelation was passed on. And that's why if you had generations that were considered to be especially spiritual or especially in tune with God's Torah, that for another generation to come 100 or 500 years later and to overturn what they said would be unthinkable. How could they do that? Or here I am sharing the gospel with a rabbi, with a Jewish leader, highly educated, been studying, learning all his life. And I come and say, well, you're misinterpreting the Hebrew scriptures. Or actually, if you look at this, you'll see that this is pointing to Jesus, the Messiah. Their response would be, who are you to teach me? Who are you to tell me? I learned from my father, who learned from his father, who learned from his father, all the way back to Moses on Mount Sinai. And not only so, our generation now is so far removed, and we are at so much less a spiritual, on so much lower spiritual plane than they were. Then how can we possibly tell people 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 years ago they were wrong in their interpretation when they were on such a higher spiritual plane? Anyway, just wanted to share those things with you. Maybe we'll get into another Jewish tradition about the end of the world that you'll find interesting a little later in the show. But I want to go to the phones almost immediately. Got a break coming up soon. So as soon as we come back, I will go to the phones. But be sure to be on my email list. If you're not, we've got a great book, an ebook to give you for free. It's called 7 Secrets of the Real Messiah. It's excerpted from my book, The Real Kosher Jesus. It represents some decades of study and reflection and thinking put together and now in a shortened, very readable, eye-opening form. It's our gift to you when you sign up to get our emails. So here's how you do it. Just go to askdrbrown.org, askdrbrown.org. Literally take 30 seconds to do it. If you can take time right now, if you're not driving, just stop and do it, askdrbrown.org. You'll see right there on the homepage, sign up for the email list. Just put your name, email address down. We'll send you the ebook for free. And then this way, every week, you'll know all the articles I've written, all the videos. The end of the week, we'll send it to you in one email with all that information. Early in the week, special resource office or announcements to make. And these days, you never know when social media is going to cut us off. You never know. This way we can stay in touch. Go to AskDrBrown.org. Sign up for our emails. We'll be right back. When I came to faith in 1971 and the immediate days after that, so I knew there were people that were called to be pastors, and there were evangelists. I knew those too. So the evangelist, that was someone that traveled from church to church, and the pastor was one state of one place. That's what I knew. And then I found out that there's some called to be teachers, that Jesus spent a lot of his ministry teaching, okay, so that was another calling. But I remember asking one day, are there prophets around today? I asked my pastor, do you think there are prophets today? By which I thought of like an Isaiah, maybe in a cave somewhere today with a long beard and a scroll. And he said, yeah, I believe there's some prophets today. And, the question of apostles we didn't really talk about because you had the 12 apostles and that was it. But then you have Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11. Ephesians 4:11, speaking of Jesus when he ascended, that he gave the apostles, or he gave some to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, or pastors, and teachers. Now, some say this is what we call fivefold ministry: apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers. Some say it's really fourfold: apostles, prophets, evangelists, and then pastor/teacher. Do these ministries all exist today? Yes, I believe they do. No, you don't have the 12 apostles or anyone functioning with that same authority today or writing scripture. But do you have people who are called to be apostles, just like, for example, Barnabas is called an apostle in Acts 14? It just means a sent one. These who are foundation layers, who are spiritual fathers, who might be church planters, who might be movement leaders. I believe, say, someone like Hudson Taylor or someone like William Booth. I believe they were apostles, even though they didn't carry that name or have that concept. I believe they are. One of my friends in India who's planted over 7,000 churches, who's planted ministries in other nations, who's built hospitals, who's been a prophetic witness for the Lord, who's almost stoned to death.
Hear our cry, send the fire.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Welcome to our Thoroughly Jewish Thursday broadcast. 866-34-TRUTH, your Jewish-related questions, even your end-time-related questions in honor of our new book, Craig Keener and me. Craig Keener and I, I just say Craig Keener and yours truly, right? Then I don't have to figure out if it's I or me. Not afraid of the Antichrist coming out on the 19th. So what's that day? Is that Tuesday? No, Monday? Anyway, 866-34-TRUTH. Let's go to the phones. We'll start in Canada with Joseph. Are you there, Joseph? I guess not. All right. Rachel, just make sure that we didn't totally lose Joseph there, or that we did, that the line's clear. Okay, let's go to James in Phoenix, Arizona. Welcome to the Line of Fire.
Hey, Dr. Brown. Thanks for taking my call.
You bet.
My question was is a Jewish end time related question, is regarding in Revelation chapter 7 about when it speaks about all the tribes of Israel, and it speaks about the 144,000. My question is, what is the take? What is the Jewish take on that? Is that like do you believe that's a physical number, or is that just like metaphorical? And also to go along with that is, how do Jews know which tribe they come from? Because every time I hear Jewish people speak about a tribe they come from, it seems like it's always just the tribe of Judah or the tribe of Levi. I've never heard somebody say I'm from the tribe of Asher or Naphtali. I've never heard anybody say that before.
Yeah, and for good reason, because most don't know. So, number one, your average Jewish person is not reading the book of Revelation, so there's not like a Jewish interpretation of the passage. But within the church, there are numbers of different ways of reading Revelation 7. We know that the book is highly symbolic. So here are several different ways it's read. One is it's read that the 12 tribes of Israel symbolize the whole church, the church being the new Israel. And it first talks about them, 144,000, then says what it really means, a multitude no one can number from every tribe, etc. And that's what comes next in Revelation 7. Although I understand why people interpret it like that, because I don't see the New Testament authors saying that the church is the new Israel or the new Jacob. I reject that interpretation. Some say it will be 144,000 Jewish people or Israelites that will be saved at the end of the age. And pre-tribbers believe that it will happen during the tribulation period in particular, that it refers to a literal 144,000 and a great multitude from the world that will also be saved during that time. That's possible, that it's speaking of a future 144,000 Israelites that will literally be saved. Or another interpretation, the one that I favor, is that the 12 times 12 is speaking of fullness. It's not a literal 144,000, but it's speaking of Romans 11:26, Jeremiah 31:1, all Israel will be saved. God will be the God of all the families of Israel at that time, so that there will be a national turning of the Jewish people to the Lord at the end of this age. And along with that, Romans 11:25, the fullness of the Gentiles. Revelation speaks of a multitude from every nation that no one can number. So I look at this as a picture of God's end-time harvest, a massive harvest of Gentile souls at the end of the age, and the turning of the Jewish people to the Messiah. But obviously we can't be dogmatic on it. Why isn't the tribe of Dan mentioned? I don't have a good answer for that. Some say, well, Dan sinned in a certain way in the Old Testament, and that's why they're excluded. But other tribes sinned. I don't have a good answer for why Dan is not mentioned there. As to your other question, sir, how is a Jew going to know their tribal affiliation and identity? Well, they don't have to, as long as God knows. We know that James, Jacob, writes to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. So he's writing to Jewish believers throughout the world, and he references them as 12 tribes. Paul in Acts references the 12 tribes serving the Lord, and Paul knew he was from the tribe of Benjamin. What basically happened was that the northern tribes, under attack from the Assyrians and just wanting to take refuge in Judah for other reasons, came down to the south and merged. Different individuals and groups came down and merged with the people of Judah, and hence their identity, tribal identity, got lost in the larger Jewish population. So, yeah, some Jews feel very confident that they go back to the tribe of Levi and they're descendants of Aaron. They may have the last name Cohen. They may have what's called the priestly gene, particular aspect of DNA that indicates that they are have that common descent. Others assume, well, we must be from Judah. That would be the more prominent tribe. But some are obviously from Benjamin, and some, if you trace the lineage all the way back, originally went to the other 10 tribes. We just have no way of tracing it today. So that's a matter of God knows. And it may also be, James, there are other Jewish people in different parts of the world today, or Israelites, that have lost their identity by and large, but God still knows who they are. And there are those who still live. They have a seventh-day Sabbath. They don't identify as Jews, but they have a seventh-day Sabbath. They circumcise their sons, etc. And they have a connection to Israel, but it's just been severed. Maybe those are some of the people that'll be represented in the end as well. So there's a lot, for God to sort out, but that's as best as I understand it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're very welcome. 866-34-TRUTH. Let's go to Alex in Diamond Bar, California. Welcome to the Line of Fire.
Hey, Dr. Brown, I loved your document. I loved your participation in the documentary commentary. I guess Covenant and Controversy.
Okay.
I even gave it to my rabbi at the temple, and I guess he was sort of talking about, I guess, a debate that Maimonides had. I guess, anyway, it's a long story. But I have a question for you. Do you believe that the congressional vote on the anti-Semitism resolution last week is a precursor to Jacob's troubles? I mean, technically, I guess it has to be, but I mean, in the long sense. But in the immediate sense, do you think that has any bearing on that particular prophecy?
Okay, so first, Jeremiah 30, Jacob's trouble, that has different dimensions to it. Certainly, when it was prophesied, it was speaking about the terrible suffering the Jewish people would have at the hands of the Babylonians in the years that followed. But it certainly refers to other periods of intense Jewish suffering out of which God delivered us, and will happen as well at the end of the age. So there's a past Jacob's trouble. There have been kind of mini Jacob's troubles through the centuries, some very, very intense. And then at the end of the age, as I believe there's shaking and upheaval around the world, God's Spirit moving mightily, massive number of people coming to faith, and much darkness and satanic activity and war, just a time of clashing of the kingdoms at the end of the age, that yes, I believe there'll be a final Jacob's trouble out of which God delivers Israel. But Elhana Omar's anti-Semitism and the weak rebuke that it got in the House, and the amount of people within the Democrat Party, even liberal Jews, who would give place to comments like that, I don't see it as any specific precursor. You could say this is a precursor to Jacob's trouble, as much as another potential step in the wrong direction. See, we don't know, Alex, if there is going to be a steady decline. In other words, that the United States more and more is going to give place to anti-Semitism. More and more hostility is going to rise. More and more America will turn against Israel. And this will be a time of final abandonment of Israel, where the Jewish people have to look to God because all the nations come against them. Or whether this is just a little drop in the bucket. In other words, that this will correct itself, that the political parties will unite in condemning anti-Semitism, that Ilhan Omar and others of like mind will not be able to serve long. We don't know. So it could be it gets worse for 5-10 years and then swings back. But if it doesn't get corrected, if you look at it like a cancer spreading in the body, just like it's spreading among the Democrats, it could spread among Republicans as well. We have no guarantee that it won't. So I don't get overwrought about it. I've written about it. I've exposed it. I've confronted it, as have many others. I'm concerned about it because it's not written anywhere in the Bible that America will always be Israel's friend. But I certainly hope that there'll be sufficient pushback against it, and that for the foreseeable future, America will stand with Israel. Not so much for Israel's good, but for America's good.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dr. Brown. I appreciate your insight.
All right, you are very welcome, sir. 866-348-7884. We come back on the other side of the break. I want to go straight to your calls, and then I'm going to look at another Talmudic text that I think you'll find interesting. We read from Mishna, next from Talmud, about the end times, an interesting tradition in Judaism. And if you say, well, what's the definitive Jewish view about the end times? There's no such thing in terms of it's been codified and this is the way it will be. There are large strokes that can be painted. There are large themes that can be affirmed. But what Judaism has done is it's codified law. In other words, for a traditional Jew, this is Sabbath practice, and this is how we celebrate this feast or holy day. And these are laws of ritual purity and a marriage. And that's what the emphasis was on, as opposed to codifying views about the Messiah. So there are large themes that are laid out that are believed, but there's not as much focus on it in Judaism. And it's not the kind of thing that is codified by law in Judaism. So there are things that are held to and strongly believed. And there's a lot of unity among traditional Jews in holding to those. But it's not the same as like, well, what end time doctrine does your church hold to? It works out a little differently in Judaism. We'll be right back. What about the Talmud? Is it anti-Christian? Is it filled with attacks on Christians and attacks on Jesus? First, let's understand when we talk about the Talmud, there are two Talmuds, the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud. We normally refer to the Babylonian Talmud. That's the more authoritative, that's fuller. That was completed a little over 500 years after the time of Jesus, just to give you context here. Some of the traditions go back to times before Jesus. Most of it is from after the destruction of the Second Temple, and then even after the Second Jewish Revolt in the 2nd century of this era. But these traditions were passed on. There are debates, discussions among the rabbis about legal issues, about biblical interpretation, about life. It's this massive compilation. It's a lifetime of study to really understand it and master it. If we stack the books of the Talmud up here, they'd be this high, okay? So does the Talmud attack Christianity? Is it anti-Christian? For the most part, you're just reading about Jewish law and discussions among rabbis, and there may be folklore, there may be passing references to things, but it is not polemicizing against other religions or polemicizing against Christianity. However, there are certain sentiments in there that are clearly anti-Christian. Now, we can go back to John's Gospel. John's Gospel, chapter 8, verse 41. This accusation was brought against Yeshua. John 8:41. It says this, you do the deeds of your father. They said to him, we're not born of fornication. We have one father. We're not born of sexual immorality. We have one father, even God. In other words, you're born of sexual immorality. This idea that Jesus was born out of wedlock, obviously a Jewish response to the claims of the virgin birth, this is found in the Talmud. It is found a few times, these references in Talmud and ancient Jewish literature, derogatory statements about Jesus, or alleging that he deceived Israel, that he was a sorcerer, or things like that. Those comments are there. They're few and far between. For the most part, the attitude of Talmud towards other faiths, if the people are worshiping idols, that's wrong. Christianity is looked at as a heresy, but the Talmud is not primarily polemicizing against other religions. So does it contain statements you could call anti-Christian? Of course. Is that the heart and soul of it? No, you could study for days, for weeks, for months, and never come across anything like that. So to characterize it as anti-Christian can be misleading, although for sure it has some very strong negative statements in there that would point to Jesus or the first disciples. But once more, few and very, very far between.
Oh God of burning, cleansing flame, send the fire.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Just looking over at our Facebook feed, greetings from Puerto Rico, shalom from Finland. It is cool. I mean, social media can be abused and misused, but it's cool. Look over at our Facebook feed and our YouTube feed. And Mr. Highlander 400 is Dr. Brown, a Pentecostal charismatic. Yes, you bet. And a Messianic Jew. Anyway, great to be with you on this Thoroughly Jewish Thursday, which is March 14th, 2019, which is our 43rd wedding anniversary. Nancy and I have been married now 43 years, best friends for 45 years. So we met 1974. I was saved about 2.5 years at that point. Nancy was a hardcore atheist, Jewish. Mom married 4 times. Heart of rebellion towards anything having to do with God. God miraculously brought her to the same little Italian Pentecostal church where I was going. How I ended up there was from the Lord. How she ended up there from the Lord. And we met, began to share the gospel with her. God opened her heart. God saved her, brought us together. 1 week after she came to faith, we started going together. 1 week after that, we knew we were in love, and we spent the rest of our lives together. And here we are 45 years later from that. And when we got married in 76, 43 years later, 2 wonderful daughters, 2 amazing sons-in-law, and 4 incredible grandchildren. I wrote an article, a tribute to Nancy, just late last night. I thought, I want to do it. I'd ordered flowers to be delivered, and we made some plans for today. But I said, I want to write something, which I hadn't done on a previous anniversary like this. So you can read it. It's on our website, AskDrBrown.org, posted on other sites as well. Yeah, and obviously it makes a big difference to marry the right person. Get to know the person, not just feel like I think the Lord's in this, but really get to know the person. But in traditional Judaism, it's been said we don't marry the one we love the one we marry. In other words, in traditional Judaism, there's a match made for a couple. Like in many parts of the world, the way it still is with the parents making the match. Now, they may look at what they think is best for the child. Some look at what's the best economic thing, but they look at it. Sometimes they have the children meet to, give them a chance to get to know each other and explore the possibility of relationship. But it's very common that in other parts of the world and through history, you marry someone you don't really know that well, and you learn to love the one you marry. All that to say, I have no question whatsoever that Nancy was God's choice for me, and that I was God's choice for her. No question about that whatsoever. But the fact is, when you make a covenant of marriage before God, as believers in particular, that's a covenant that you made. I think I married the wrong person. I was talking to someone the other day. I don't think I ever should have married my wife. I said, but you did. And you got married as believers. So now you love her as Messiah loved the body. You love her as Christ loved the church. That's what you do. You lay down your life for her, and God will bless your marriage. But it's wonderful when you have that great confidence that married the one that God gave me. And so here we are. What an amazing journey. I am blessed beyond words. And for 2 Jews to get saved in a little Italian Pentecostal church in Queens, New York, if you knew the whole story, especially how she ended up there, it's the Lord. The Lord can bring people together. 866-34-TRUTH, taking your Jewish-related questions today. We go to Casper in New Jersey. Welcome to The Line of Fire.
Dr. Brown, thank you so much for taking my call. I love your ministry and love what you do. I don't want to take too much of your time. My question is, my father a couple years ago became a hardcore Christian, and he got involved with the Hebrews Roots movement. And my apologetics in Judaism wasn't really high, so we got in a lot of arguments, and we had to stop talking about it because it was just a big wedge in our father-son relationship. My question is, could you explain and I believe the Daniel 9 prophecy of the 70 weeks? I get confused when the second temple is supposed to be rebuilt, and then the time from the 69 week into the 70th week, when that time frame started, when the second temple was supposed to be created or built, and then the destruction of the second temple. So if you could just please explain that a little better, please, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, just a real quick question, Casper. How do you identify yourself, your own beliefs?
I'm a Christian. I love Christ. He's my world. He's my Lord and Savior.
All right. So when you say your father became a hardcore Christian, initially that seemed like a good thing.
Yes, I became a Christian, and then I kind of guided him, in that way. It was I became a Christian first, and then he became a Christian then.
And are you Gentile or Jewish?
I'm Puerto Rican. I'm Puerto Rican and Peruvian.
Got it. Okay.
I'm Gentile.
Got it. So then your dad got caught up in this thing that he's supposed to rediscover his Hebrew roots, and that Torah observance is mandatory, and all this, right? There's a book that you may find helpful. Do you have my book, 60 Questions Christians Ask About Jewish Beliefs and Practices?
I do not. I do not. I do have the. I'm trying to read the Messianic book of the objections right now.
Right. You'll find it. Yeah. So, okay. Tell you what, when we're done, stay on the phone for a moment. Rachel's going to get your info. I want to send you this book as a gift. The last quarter of the book, I deal with Christians and the law, and maybe some of that will be helpful. So I want to send that to you as
thank you so much.
As my gift. 60 Questions Christians Ask About Jewish Beliefs and Practices. And volume 3, Casper, you're going to find a lot more detail about Daniel 9:24-27. But in short, the God is speaking to Daniel. Okay, you're praying about the 70 years in return from exile, and that's important, and the temple's going to be rebuilt. But let me tell you something much bigger, a much bigger picture that's not going to be 70 years, but 70 times 7. So it speaks of 3 periods of time, 7 times 7, so 49 years, 7 times 62, so 434 years, and the final 7 years. There may be minor gaps in between these because it's 3 distinct time periods. So the first one has to do with the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Some anointed leader raised up to do that. All right, when the decree is to, there are debates among Jewish and Christian scholars as to when the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem starts. Okay, but you have that first, so that's a 49-year period. Then you have the 434-year period, so the temple standing, etc. And then you have the final 7-year period. There are some Christians who believe that's still future, that final week is separated and is still future. I don't understand it like that because it does speak of the destruction of the temple. So God's speaking about the building of the second temple and its destruction. And before that is done, before the temple is destroyed, there will be an anointed one who's cut off with nothing for himself. And what will happen is that everlasting righteousness is brought in, atonement is made for the people, the prophetic vision is sealed, etc. So we see that as a strong messianic prophecy that before the second temple was destroyed, that before that happened, that the Messiah would come and die for our sins and bring about everlasting atonement. And that is the ultimate fulfillment of the passage there. And then sometime after that, the second temple is destroyed. So we know this is all within a generation that this happens. So you have these 3 distinct time periods, 49 years, 434 years, 7 years. It's possible that there are gaps of different kinds in between them. Some try to say that the 70th week is really fulfilled when, when the Messiah dies for our sins, and that's when sacrifice and offering is cut off. In other words, it's no longer effective in God's sight. And then after that, the temple's destroyed. I think the 70th week refers to the final destruction of the temple in the year 70. But though we can debate some of those things, the broad strokes to me are clear that all this had to happen before the second temple was destroyed, which makes it a strong messianic prophecy. All right.
Right. And when the first 49 years, where is that in Scripture? Is like with that first part you talking
Well,
about?
not in a precise way. In other words,
okay.
It is the period of the rebuilding, basically. And
Gotcha.
some claim, well, it was the decree of Cyrus, but then that doesn't happen immediately with the rebuilding. Some say it was a decree from another Persian king later on. There is debate about it. Some try to say it was when God spoke to Daniel, in which case you have some gaps along the way. Because you have a period from Daniel's day until the destruction of the second temple is well over 490 years. So that's why there's some ambiguities. And what I try to focus on, okay, let's look at the broad strokes and let's see what had to happen before the second temple was destroyed. All right, stay right there, Casper. Rachel will get your contact info and we'll send you that book as a gift. Maybe it'll help in your dialogue with your dad. Let's go to Freeman in Wichita Falls, Texas. Thanks for calling the Line of Fire.
You're welcome, Dr. Brown. And by the way, I just want to wish you a happy anniversary.
Thank you, sir.
I also met my wife at a Pentecostal church, and the first thing that she had mentioned was, one of the first things she mentioned was that she was getting ready to go on a trip to Israel.
Oh, really?
And yes, sir. And after she told me that, I knew within my heart she was the one. So.
Ah, okay. Amazing. Yes, sir. Well, thank you.
Yes.
Yes, so your question.
Yes, sir. So the question is, okay, my aunt called me, or not called me, she texted me the other day asking me to watch a video by Stephen Darby.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever heard of him. But anyway,
not sure.
I ended up watching the video, and he was talking about something, and I know that it's spreading pretty rapidly. He's not a Hebrew Israelite, but he's going along the same lines as the doctrine of the Hebrew Israelites. Anyway, he was talking about Negro land. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's supposed to be in Africa, and he was showing this map or whatnot. But anyway, I just wanted to know if you were familiar with that, and if you are, because she wanted me to call her back right after I watched it. I haven't called her back yet. I wanted to, to get some more insight on it. Of course, I asked the Lord to help me to explain it as well. But I believe, this type of verbiage is starting to spread.
Got it.
And,
yeah. So I'm not familiar with him, but looking online, he's got a church, Destiny Ministries Church. In other words, he's not preaching as a Hebrew Israelite, but these related concepts, where are they going? We'll comment on that when we come back. I want to present to you a unique way that you can partner together with me to reach Jewish people with the good news of Jesus, Yeshua, the Messiah. Hey, Paul wrote that the gospel is to the Jew first, but many of us don't know how to reach the Jewish people with the gospel. Can I tell you, we have a unique open door, and Jewish people are ready to hear, but we need your help. When I was in Israel recently, my last hour in Jerusalem, about a dozen different people came up to me, and they wanted to thank me for the impact of our message. One Jewish woman came up to me, a believer in Jesus. She said, "You saved my son's life. He was falling away. He was getting pulled by other objections to Jesus. He read your material. He's back in the faith." A young man came up to me. He said he and his Orthodox Jewish friends, here he is, with the yarmulke, the head covering, the traditional Jewish outfit. He said he and his Jewish friends, his Orthodox friends, watch my debates with rabbis. A few years ago, I was able to lead a Holocaust survivor to faith in Jesus. He was a brilliant man, an atheist who had fled the Holocaust. He read my books on answering Jewish objections to Jesus, came to faith, led his wife to the Lord before they left this world. Friends, we have the resources. We have books ready to be translated in Hebrew to be distributed in Israel. We have our Real Messiah website, unique for reaching Jewish people, Orthodox Jews with the gospel, ready to be translated in Hebrew, ready to do internet campaigns to get into every home in Israel. Every cell phone in Israel can have this message, but we need your help. Every gift to our ministry will literally help us reach another Jewish person with the good news of Jesus the Messiah. Go to askdrbrown.org, askdrbrown.org, and when you go there, we will partner together to bring salvation to Israel and the Jewish people. Together, we're making a great difference.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown. Your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
מן השעות והשניות והקולות באוזניות מן הכוכב על המגדל.
Welcome, friends, to Thoroughly Jewish Thursday. Just this word from Israel, well, within the last couple of hours, rockets fired from Gaza on Israel, causing alerts even throughout Tel Aviv. Of course, this draws a military response from Israel. The critics say, well, what else are the people in Gaza supposed to do? They're in a big open-air prison. Problem in Gaza is the leadership, Hamas. The problem is the people elected the terrorist leadership. You say, well, why would they do that? Well, it's because Hamas does humanitarian work. Hamas stands for the people in many other ways. But the leadership is corrupt, like most of the senior Palestinian leadership, as even Palestinian Christians have bemoaned, as we've spoken about these things. And yeah, you say, well, did the rockets kill anyone? Oh, so it's only okay to retaliate if people die. In other words, if the rockets don't hit their mark, then you don't retaliate. Oh, yeah, sure. We'd do that if rockets were coming into America from Canada or from Mexico. Sure, we'd do that. Yeah, Israel must use restraint in its use of force, but it absolutely has every right to reply with force when attacked. Okay, so back to Freeman. The Negro Land thing, from what I can tell, is primarily associated with Pastor Stephen Darby, or widely associated with him, and it is this notion, it is this notion, Freeman, that there is this original Hebrew identity, that blacks are rediscovering their Hebrew heritage, and that now they begin to preach this and emphasize it. As I'm looking online, almost everything I see is a video link, as opposed to something in writing, and most of it associated with this one pastor. So here's the long and short of it. There is no question that there are legitimately African Jews. There's no question about that. Just like there are Caucasian Jews like me, okay? And there are Jews from many ethnicities around the world. I can't say every, but many ethnicities around the world. As the tribes of Israel, the Jewish people were scattered around the world and intermarried with those around them, as people converted into Judaism. I say this all the time, but in Judaism, if you marry out, you assimilate it into the larger culture, right? If someone converts to Judaism and marries in, now those different cultures are brought into the larger sphere of the Jewish people. Hence, you have Jews of all different colors and of all different ethnicities. So there's no question that there are African Jews. And some of them, for example, are the Ethiopian Jews, or the Lemba Jews in Zimbabwe. All right, there's discussion about the Igbo tribe in Nigeria, and are these people recovering Jewish roots and things like that, and it's part of their heritage. So there's no question that a tiny minority of Africans have Israelite roots, okay? What happened is, as I understand it, and as a colleague has helped enlighten me on this, himself an African Jew, a black Jew, is that a movement originally of African Jews in America who were Torah observant then became a wider movement about black Hebrew identity. So it made this jump, and now this idea that blacks are the original Hebrews. You can almost see the progression. So it starts off with legitimate African Jews. Now the larger idea that all African Israelites, you would say, and now the larger idea that all Africans are Israelites. And then the next step is that no Israelites are Israelites if they're not African. But bottom line is, what makes us who we are is being in Jesus, being in the Messiah, not being Jew or Gentile, not being male or female, but being in the Messiah. That's where our spirituality comes from. And this idea, well, if we'll trace it back, we'll see that the Israelites were all originally black. False. If you'll trace it back. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry. Something I'm looking at, not confirmed, but that Stephen Darby passed away in December 2017. That's an internet report. Not sure if that's accurate. So if we're speaking about the living or deceased, either way, I hope that Stephen Darby truly knew the Lord, even if there was some error in what he was teaching or is teaching. But bottom line is, when there's this emphasis, number one, that this is our identity and we're going to push this, and it's a big thing, and now we all have to observe Torah. Error number one. Error number two, well, the original Israelites were all black, and the white man is an imposter and not really Jews. Error number two. All right. Those are the things to be on guard for, Freeman. So if we find out more, and I may get information, my black Messianic Jewish friend who listens regularly will always contact me and say, here's info for you, or you missed this, you should have filled people in on this. So when we talk about this subject, I'm always eager to get his perspective. Yeah, Kai, quickly, let's grab a text from the Talmud, then I want to go back to the phones for another call. At the end of Talmudic Tractate Sanhedrin, the end of 96b, so that's the back page, front, back, AB, of page 96, or Daf 96, this big page. Rav Nachman said to Rabbi Yitzchak, have you heard when the son of giants, Bar Nifle, will come, or the son of the fallen? There's debate, what does Nifle mean? Rabbi Yitzchak said to him, who is the son of giants, or son of the fallen? Rav Nachman said to him, he is the Messiah. Rabbi Yitzchak asked him, do you call the Messiah son of giants or son of the fallen? Rav Nachman said to him, yes, as it is written, on that day I will establish, this is from Amos, the 9th chapter, I will establish the tabernacle of David that is fallen, Hanofelet. That is why the Messiah is called Bar Nifli. Rabbi Yitzchak said to him that this is what Rabbi Yochanan says, during the generation in which the Messiah, son of David, comes, Torah scholars decrease, and as for the rest of the people, their eyes fail with sorrow and grief, and troubles increase, and the harsh decrees will be introduced before the first passes, the second quickly comes. This is the beginning of the lengthiest discussion in the Talmud, where different leaders give their perspectives, and it's the opinions of several generations merged together. But there is a theme of spiritual decline at the end. There is a theme that the world will either be totally righteous or totally wicked when the Messiah comes. There is a theme that if the Jewish people are worthy, he'll come in the clouds of heaven, so speedily. If unworthy, he'll come riding on a donkey, hence slowly. And of course, we say it's not either or. The Messiah first comes riding on a donkey, then comes in the clouds of heaven. There's a Talmudic tradition that says that the whole world will turn to heresy before the Messiah comes. So a traditional Jew would look at the spread of Christianity around the world as a fulfillment of that prophecy. We would look at it as a fulfillment of messianic prophecy of the Messiah's light shining in the nations. 866-34-TRUTH. Let's go to Gary in Huntersville, North Carolina. Thanks for holding. Welcome to the Line of Fire.
You bet, Dr. Brown, and thanks for having me, and congratulations on a real long marriage. I praise that, I really do, and I wish you success in your new book.
Thank you, sir.
I've got kind of a two-part segment that I'd like your comments on. The second is more Jewish related, but the first part is I'm a pre-tribber, and I look at all the evidence, and I kind of find a pre-trib sealed in the deal where in the book of Revelation we have cataloged a 7-year period of tribulation. Mm-hmm. If we were to live in that, and let's just say for numbers' sake, we were in the 5th year of that, mm-hmm. we could ask ourselves the question, when is the Lord going to return? We could say 2 years because of the cataloging of that 7-year period. And then when we find Jesus in Matthew 24 saying, no one knows the hour that I'll return, not my Father, not the angels in heaven, those don't work together. They have to be two separate events. I just want to know first your comment on that.
Yeah. So here's, I appreciate that, and you speak for many in saying it. Here's where I differ. Number one, the idea that we'll be able to say exactly this is the beginning of the tribulation, or it started here. Because remember, he says no one knows the day or the hour, but the times and the seasons you do know. And 1 Thessalonians 5 says for us, the Messiah is not returning as a thief in the night. Because we're children of the day and we're ready and we know the times and seasons. So it's the day or the hour that no one knows. But he does give signs and said, when you see this happen, look up, your redemption is drawing near. So we are supposed to know when it's getting close. But the first thing is, even if there was an exact 7-year period, because it's debatable in Revelation, there's so much symbolism there throughout the whole book.
True.
Does it actually mean literal 7 years? Does 7 speak of a time of fullness and completeness of suffering? You say no, but it mentions days, months. So it can be debated. I understand that. But
very good.
Even if there was an actual 7-year period, there could be massive debate. Did it start now? Did it start 6 months ago? When was the beginning? Are we in the 3rd year, the 5th year? I've had people say, we're in the tribulation now. I think obviously not, but it's not obvious to them. That's one thing.
Yeah, correct.
The other thing is, Jesus says, for the sake of the elect, the days will be shortened. So what does that mean? So my take is we should know times, seasons, getting close, getting near. So something's is at the door without knowing the specific day or hour. And also for us, though, the coming doesn't overtake us as a thief. Okay, with that, sir, I apologize. We're out of time. And for everyone else, so sorry I couldn't get to more calls. I'm really planning to open up the phones as much as possible next week as we talk about the end times and have more of you weigh in with your questions. But look, let's agree that we love the Lord, that we're eager for his coming, that we live with urgency while there's yet light, and that we long to see the day of his return. And we don't have a guarantee of tomorrow, so we live in readiness to meet the Lord every day. All right, God bless you. Thank you for joining us today.